Long before the first calendar was carved, our ancestors faced a profound mystery. How did ancient storytellers imagine time before history began? We are traveling across continents to uncover the myths and legends crafted to explain our deepest origins. By the end, you will see our shared human past through an entirely new lens. We will explore why cultures from the Australian outback to the Mayan jungles described a primordial chaos, and how a giant's body could become the world itself. What story would you tell to explain the beginning of everything? This emptiness was not a simple nothingness, but a state of pure, unformed potential. Ancient storytellers often envisioned it as a dark, endless ocean. For the Egyptians, this was the god Nun, a silent, infinite sea of chaotic waters where no land existed and no light pierced the depths. It was a timeless realm, holding within it the seeds of all life and all gods, waiting for the moment of awakening. The Greeks gave this void a name, chaos, a gaping chasm that was both a deity and a condition, the origin point from which earth and love and the underworld would eventually spring. Personifying these forces was a masterstroke of human imagination. It transformed an intimidating philosophical question, what came before, into a relatable story of birth and emergence. How else could you explain the arrival of everything from nothing? By giving the void a face and a name, these cultures created a foundational character in the greatest story ever told, the story of existence itself. This shared starting point reveals a profound truth about our ancestors. They looked into the abyss of time and did not see mere emptiness. They saw a canvas waiting for the first brushstroke of a god, a giant, or a word. From that silent, watery chaos, a completely different vision of time emerges from the heart of Australia. The Aboriginal concept of the Dreamtime defies our modern, straight-line calendars. It is not a distant past event but a sacred and eternal dimension known as the Everyone. In this framework, time is not a river flowing in one direction. It is more like a vast, shimmering landscape where every moment exists at once. The Dreamtime is the foundational era when ancestral beings, immense spiritual entities, journeyed across a formless world. With every step they took, rivers carved their courses. With every word they sang, mountains rose and animals took their forms. They did not simply create the world and then vanish. Their essence and power remain embedded within the very rocks, waterholes, and living creatures they shaped. This makes the land itself a sacred text, a living record of those primordial events. How do you keep such a history alive? It is not written in books but enacted through ceremony. Through song, dance, and intricate art, Aboriginal people do not merely recount these stories. They participate in them. They walk the same paths as the ancestors, sing the same songs, and in doing so, they make the ancient past a vibrant, present reality. This perspective offers a profound challenge to the Western idea of history as a sequence of locked-away events. Here, history is a perpetual presence, a continuous relationship binding people, the land, and the cosmos into a single, unbroken whole. This holistic view of time as a cycle of eternal return appears in many ancient cultures, each with its own unique expression. While the Dreamtime presents a continuous, living history, the floodplains of Mesopotamia offer a far more dramatic origin story. Here, the world began not with a gentle song, but with a cosmic war. The great epic poem known as the Enuma Elish recounts a brutal struggle among the gods themselves. In the beginning, there was only the fresh water, Apsu, and the salt water, Tiamat, mingled together in a single, watery mass. From their union sprang the younger gods, whose noise and energy so disturbed the primordial quiet that Apsu plotted their destruction. This led to a rebellion, a deicide, and finally, an all-out war. The champion of the young gods, Marduk, faced the monstrous chaos dragon form of Tiamat. After a colossal battle, he slew her, and from her massive body he crafted the world as we know it. He split her carcass in two, using one half to form the sky and the other to form the earth. Humanity was then created from the blood of a rebellious god, Pangu, to be servants for the victorious deities. This was not a gentle creation. It was a story forged in violence, establishing a world order born from conflict and maintained through service. The universe itself was literally built from the corpse of a vanquished goddess, a constant physical reminder that order was wrestled from chaos at a great cost. This world view shaped how Mesopotamians saw their own place in the cosmos, forever subject to the unpredictable will of powerful, often squabbling divine rulers. Their entire social structure, from the king down to the lowliest laborer, was mirrored in this celestial hierarchy, yet this divinely ordained order was not permanent. The gods could just as easily decide to wipe the slate clean. This brings us to the most famous cataclysm of all, the Great Flood. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero Utnapishtim reveals how the gods, annoyed by the noise of humanity, convened a council and voted to eradicate mankind with an overwhelming deluge. One sympathetic god, secretly warned Utnapishtim, instructing him to build a great boat to save his family and the seed of all living things. After the floodwaters covered the entire earth for days, and the gods themselves trembled at the destruction they had unleashed, the boat came to rest on a mountain. Utnapishtim released birds to find dry land, and when he offered a sacrifice, the gods, starving for the offerings they had been deprived of, gathered like flies around the smoke. They had not fully considered the consequences of their own rage. The flood story served as a powerful turning point, a divine reset that marked the end of one epoch and the beginning of another. It was a mythic explanation for a cataclysm so profound it felt like the world had ended and been reborn. These stories were far more than simple entertainment. They were the foundational texts of a civilization, explaining everything from the origin of kingship to the reason for sudden, devastating river floods. They taught that humanity existed by the sufferance of powerful, fickle beings, and that history moved in great, sweeping arcs defined not by human ambition, but by divine decree. This theme of a world-cleansing flood was not confined to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, however. It echoes across the globe, a shared memory of a great reset that appears in countless cultures, each with its own unique messenger and its own sacred mountain. This idea of a world reborn through water finds a powerful echo, but also a profound divergence in the cosmology of ancient India. While Mesopotamian myths saw a single, definitive flood, Hindu scriptures present time itself as an ocean of endless cycles. The universe breathes in a great, rhythmic pattern of creation, preservation, and dissolution, known as the days and nights of Brahma. Within each of these cosmic cycles unfold four distinct ages or yugas, each with its own spiritual character. The cycle begins not in chaos but in perfection. The first and longest age is the Satya Yuga, a golden era where humanity lives in perfect harmony with divine law. Truth is the very air people breathe, and life is lived in a state of grace and longevity. But this golden age does not last. The wheel of time turns inexorably forward, ushering in the Treta Yuga, where virtue is diminished by 1/4. Ritual and sacrifice become necessary to maintain cosmic order. Next comes the Dvapara Yuga, where righteousness is halved, and a sense of duality and conflict begins to emerge in the world. The cycle culminates in our current age, the Kali Yuga, the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. Here, virtue is reduced to a mere quarter of its original strength. It is an era of short lives, limited wisdom, and spiritual confusion. This is not a linear descent into oblivion, however. It is simply the winter of the cosmic year. After the Kali Yuga completes its course, the universe is dissolved and purified, only to be reborn again into a new Satya Yuga, starting the entire majestic million-year cycle all over again. This vision transforms history from a one-way street into a cosmic carousel. There is no single beginning and no final end, only an eternal return. So what does this mean for humanity? It suggests that our triumphs and failures, our virtues and our vices, are not unique. They are part of a grand, repeating pattern. The struggles we face today were faced in the last Kali Yuga and will be faced again in the next. This philosophy offers both a sobering perspective on human nature and a profound sense of solace, for even in the darkest age, the promise of a returning golden dawn is woven into the fabric of time itself. This cyclical model stands in stark contrast to the linear timelines that would later dominate Western thought. The Norse vision of the beginning was forged in ice and fire. At the start of everything was Ginnungagap, a yawning, empty chasm that existed before the world itself. To its north lay Niflheim, a land of primordial ice, mist, and cold so profound it could freeze time itself. To the south was Muspelheim, a realm of unending fire, home to sparks and embers and a heat that could shatter that very ice. And in the gap between them, where the scorching winds met the freezing rime, a cosmic reaction occurred. The ice of Niflheim began to melt, and from those dripping, life-giving drops, the first being slowly coalesced. This was Ymir, the ancestor of all frost giants, a being of pure, chaotic potential who grew and fed from the milk of a great cow that had also emerged from the melting frost. But this was not a peaceful genesis. Ymir's existence was one of raw, untamed power, and from his own body more giants were born. The stage was set not for a gentle creation, but for a necessary revolution. From Ymir's lineage also came the first gods, Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve. They saw the chaotic, giant-filled universe that Ymir represented, and knew a new world could not be born from the old without a cataclysmic act. In a mythic event that echoes the Mesopotamian struggle, the three brothers rose up and slew the primordial giant. This was not a random act of violence but a foundational sacrifice. They dragged Ymir's colossal body into the void of Ginnungagap and began to build the world from his corpse. His flesh became the earth, his unspilled blood became the oceans and lakes. His bones and teeth were piled up to become mountains and cliffs. His skull was lifted high by four dwarfs to form the dome of the sky, and his brain was tossed into the air to become the clouds. Even his eyebrows were used, fashioned into a protective wall around the newly formed land of Midgard, the future home of humanity. This entire cosmos, from the ground underfoot to the sky overhead, was literally constructed from the body of a slain god. It is a creation myth drenched in a stark, practical poetry, reflecting the harsh realities of a northern world where survival itself was a daily conquest. The Norse did not imagine a world gently sung into being, but one violently and purposefully carved from the body of a defeated primordial force. Order was not a default state, but something hard-won through conflict and immense sacrifice. This theme of creation through destruction, of a world built from the remains of a god, appears in other cultures with a startling resonance, suggesting a shared, ancient understanding of how life inevitably springs from death. Far to the east, another primordial giant performed the ultimate act of cosmic architecture. In the beginning, Chinese legends speak of a state of utter chaos that took the form of a dark, swirling cosmic egg. Inside this egg slept the giant Pangu, curled in perfect stillness for 18,000 years. Upon awakening, he found himself trapped in a suffocating gloom, a space where heaven and earth were pressed together into a single, indistinguishable mass. With a mighty roar, he swung a great axe that materialized in his hand, and with one colossal strike, he cleaved the unity in two. The clear, light parts, the yang, began to rise upwards to form the sky, while the heavy, murky parts, the yin, sank downwards to become the earth. To prevent them from merging back into chaos, Pangu placed himself between them, pushing the sky higher with his head and stamping the earth firmer with his feet, each day increasing the separation by 10 feet. For another 18,000 years, he held this immense, solitary vigil until heaven and earth were finally fixed in their permanent places. Exhausted by his timeless labor, the great giant lay down and died. But his death was not an end, it was the true beginning of the world as we know it. His breath became the wind and clouds, his voice rolled across the plains as thunder. His left eye transformed into the sun, and his right eye ascended as the moon. His limbs and torso became the great mountain ranges that pillar the sky, while his blood flowed out to form the rivers and oceans. His veins became the paths that crisscrossed the land, his muscles the fertile fields, and the stars and planets themselves were born from the hair on his skin. This is a creation story of immense, patient sacrifice, where the universe is not conquered in battle, but nurtured into being through sustained effort. Pangu did not fight an external monster of chaos. He was the chaos, and his own body became the means of its transformation into a harmonious, balanced order. His act established the fundamental Chinese principle of yin and yang, the interdependent forces of dark and light, female and male, earth and sky, that must exist in equilibrium for the world to function. Here, the prehistory of the cosmos is a slow, organic process of structuring, both physical and metaphysical, where a single entity's life and death gives rise to everything. This vision of a world born from a body stands as a profound parallel to the Norse tale of Ymir, yet it carries a completely different emotional weight, one of deliberate care rather than violent conquest. This trial and error of the gods finds its ultimate expression in the mist-shrouded highlands of the Maya. Their great book of creation, the Popol Vuh, presents a world not made in a single divine moment, but through a series of failed experiments. The gods desired creatures who could speak their names, who could offer praise and sustain them with worship. Their first attempt produced the animals of the forest, the deer and birds and jaguars. But these beings could only squawk and howl. They could not articulate the names of their creators, and so they were relegated to the forest, their flesh destined to be eaten. Next, the gods fashioned beings from mud. These figures could speak, but their words were slurred and meaningless. They dissolved in the rain, returning to the earth from which they were formed. The third attempt used wood. The wooden people walked and talked and multiplied, building houses and raising families. Yet they had no hearts, no minds, and no memory of the gods who made them. They were empty, ungrateful vessels, and so the gods sent a great flood to smash them, followed by a torrent of pitch from the sky and attacks from their own pots and grinding stones, until the few survivors were transformed into the monkeys that swing in the trees. Each failed creation was a lesson learned, a step closer to a being with true consciousness. The final, successful creation was an act of profound sacredness. The gods discovered yellow and white maize, the divine substance. They ground it into a fine paste, and from this golden dough, they fashioned the first 4 true human men. These beings made of corn possessed sight and understanding from the very beginning. They looked upon the world and immediately gave thanks to the gods, not out of obligation, but with genuine, overflowing hearts. They could see so far and understand so much that the gods, fearing their own creations, had to cloud their vision, limiting their sight to create the world we know today. This entire process was mirrored in the epic journey of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. These divine brothers were ball players and tricksters who ventured into the dark, multi-layered underworld of Xibalba to confront the lords of death. Through a series of impossible trials, using cleverness and magical power, They outwitted the death gods and ultimately triumphed, rising reborn as the sun and the moon. Their victory in the underworld was the necessary precondition for the successful creation of humanity from maize. It was a cosmic struggle that secured a stable place for humans in the universe, proving that order and life could be won from the jaws of chaos and death. The Mayan narrative beautifully frames prehistory not as a singular event, but as a divine workshop, a process of iterative design where humanity was the ultimate sacred achievement. This theme of multiple attempts of a world refined through successive failures appears again and again, revealing a deep-seated intuition that our existence was anything but accidental. On the vast plains of southern Africa, the San people carry a history that is not carved in stone but woven into the very air. Their oral traditions speak of a time when the world itself was soft and new, a landscape still cooling from its own creation. This primordial era was shaped by the whims of a being known as Kagan, a creator whose favorite form was that of a praying mantis. Kagan was not a distant, all-powerful god, but a trickster, a figure of immense power and profound unpredictability. In one story, he might carefully place the moon in the sky to give light to the first people. In another, he could lose a sandal in a river and, in his frustration, cause a devastating flood. His actions were not always noble, but they were always transformative, carving the features of the world and establishing the customs that would govern life. It was through his trickery that the eland, a magnificent antelope sacred to the San, was first discovered and given to humanity. This was not a world built in a single, solemn act, but one that emerged from a series of curious, sometimes comical, events. The sun was not always in the sky. It was a man who threw his sandals into the air until one stuck and became the light we know. This world, presents prehistory not as a stately procession of gods, but as a time of fluid boundaries. Animals, people, and divine forces interacted directly, their forms and natures shifting with the needs of the story. A man could become a star, a mantis could be the creator of all. This deep interconnectedness is the core of the San philosophy, a belief that every element of the world, from the smallest insect to the brightest celestial body, is part of a single living web. How do you preserve such a nuanced understanding of the universe? The answer lies not in written law, but in the living breath of the storyteller. Around a fire, under a canopy of stars, these narratives are performed, not just recited. The storyteller becomes a conduit to that malleable past, their voice and gestures bringing the age of Kagan to life for a new generation. The story itself is the bridge, a sacred vessel carrying the wisdom, the humor, and the identity of a people across the chasm of time. This role, the keeper of the first stories, is perhaps the oldest profession in human history. The storyteller's fire was the first classroom, a flickering hearth around which the entire cosmos could be conjured from memory and breath. These individuals were far more than entertainers. They were the living libraries of their people, the master weavers tasked with spinning the chaotic threads of prehistory into a coherent and meaningful tapestry. Their tools were not pen and parchment, but the rhythm of an epic poem, the cadence of a sacred chant, the powerful symbolism of a ritual dance. Through these arts, they performed a kind of magic, giving voice to the wind and intention to the thunder. A terrifying lightning storm became the wrath of a sky god. The gentle, life-giving rain transformed into the blessings of a benevolent deity. By personifying these immense, impersonal forces of nature, the storyteller made the world knowable. They translated the overwhelming mystery of existence into a drama with characters, conflicts, and resolutions that any person, young or old, could understand and internalize. This process of giving the formless a face was the very heart of their power. It turned abstract cosmic principles into a narrative that could guide a life. The story of a god who valued honesty above all else was not just a tale. It was a lesson in social conduct, reinforcing the bonds of trust that held the community together. The epic of an ancestor's great migration across a frozen land was not mere history. It was a source of identity, a reminder of shared resilience that fostered an unbreakable sense of belonging. The storyteller was the guardian of this collective soul, the keeper of the map that showed a people their place not just on the land, but within the grand story of the cosmos itself. But this was not a static role. A master storyteller was also an adapter, a skilled interpreter. They understood that for a story to live, it must breathe with the times. The same core myth of a great flood might be told with different emphasis to a group of farmers fearing a drought than to a group of young hunters learning about respect for the spirits of the game. They would subtly shift the characters, emphasize a different moral, or weave in a recent event, ensuring that the ancient wisdom remained relevant to the present moment. This fluidity is why myths evolved over centuries, absorbing new cultural values and environmental understandings like a tree absorbs sunlight. The storyteller's imagination was the most crucial tool in this process, a sophisticated instrument for pattern recognition and meaning-making. They used powerful literary devices that we still recognize today. The metaphor, for instance, allowed them to draw profound connections. The rising and setting sun became a daily metaphor for life, death, and rebirth, a cycle mirrored in the seasons and in human existence. Hyperbole gave their stories scale and emotional weight. A hero did not just lift a large rock, he hurled a mountain into the sea to create a new island. This exaggeration was not seen as a lie, but as a way to express the monumental truth of that hero's foundational impact. These techniques transformed raw, unnerving cosmic questions into structured, memorable, and deeply human sagas. They were not inventing fictions to deceive, but crafting truths to illuminate, building a bridge of story across the vast, dark chasm of time before history began. Mythic time was not merely the distant past. It was a different kind of reality altogether, a sacred dimension that stood apart from the steady, predictable march of years and seasons. Ancient cultures drew a profound line between this foundational era and the historical time that followed. In mythic time, the rules were different. Gods walked the earth, animals spoke, and the very landscape was soft and malleable. This was the age of miracles, when the fundamental laws of nature and society were established by divine hands. Once that work was complete, the world settled into the rhythm we recognize today, the linear progression of human events we call history. This conceptual division was crucial. It allowed a society to venerate its origins as something utterly unique and powerful, a series of events too momentous to be confined within a simple calendar. The creation of the world, the Great Flood, the deeds of the first ancestors, these were not historical events in the modern sense. They were the bedrock upon which history itself was built. This is why so many creation stories feel timeless and placeless, set in a vague and dreamlike long, long ago. It was a way of saying these events happened outside of time, in a realm where anything was possible. This framework provided a sacred anchor for the entire culture. By compartmentalizing the inexplicable into a special, foundational epoch, ancient peoples could make sense of their own, more ordinary existence. The chaos and wonder belonged to the mythic age, the struggles of kings, the outcomes of harvests, the records of generations, these belonged to historical time. This distinction reveals a sophisticated understanding of the world, one that made room for both the miraculous and the mundane. It honored the mystery of ultimate origins while creating a space for human agency and recorded memory. This very separation, however, would one day be challenged by a new way of thinking, a shift towards a historical consciousness that sought to document and explain the past on purely human terms. These recurring symbols are not mere decorative flourishes. They form a universal language, a code used by storytellers across the globe to express the inexpressible. Take the symbol of the cosmic egg. It appears with stunning regularity, from the Finnish epic Kalevala to the ancient Orphic mysteries of Greece and the Hindu scriptures. This is no coincidence. An egg is the perfect, self-contained metaphor for the state of the universe before creation. It holds within its shell the totality of existence, a unity of opposites, yolk and white, all dormant and waiting for the moment of cracking. Its smooth, unbroken surface represents limitless potential, and the act of it breaking open mirrors the violent, beautiful separation of the cosmos into heaven and earth. It is a symbol of birth on the grandest scale, a single image that conveys both the fragility and the immense creative power of that primordial moment. Water is another foundational symbol, perhaps the most common of all. It is almost always the starting point, the formless, dark, and infinite sea from which the first land emerges. But its meaning is deeply layered. Water represents chaos, yes, the unregulated and dangerous forces of Nun or Tiamat. Yet it is also the source of all life, a substance of purification and rebirth. A flood does not only destroy, it washes away the old, failed world, preparing the ground for a new, purified beginning. This duality is central to its power. It is both the terrifying abyss and the life-giving womb. Then we have the great serpent or the dragon, a figure that slithers through countless creation myths. In Mesopotamia, it was Tiamat, the chaos dragon. In Norse mythology, it was the world serpent, Jormungandr, cast into the sea to grow so large it could encircle the earth. These creatures often embody the untamed, chaotic forces that the gods must conquer to establish cosmic order. They are not evil in a simple sense, but represent the raw, unpredictable power of nature that must be subdued, channeled, or contained for a stable world to exist. Their defeat is the mythic equivalent of humanity's eternal struggle to impose order on a wild and unpredictable environment. What does this shared symbolic language tell us? It reveals a collective human psyche grappling with the same fundamental questions. The fear of chaos, the hope for rebirth, the awe of creation. These are universal human experiences. The symbols provided a framework, a set of mental tools that allowed every member of a culture, from the elder to the child, to grasp these profound concepts. A farmer who had never studied philosophy could understand the meaning of a great flood. A hunter knew the significance of a tree that connected the earth to the heavens. This symbolic language made the mysteries of prehistory accessible, memorable, and deeply personal. And this celestial connection was not just metaphorical. The ancients saw these cosmic struggles mirrored in the night sky, mapping their foundational stories onto the stars themselves. The night sky was not just a spectacle for our ancestors. It was a living archive, a colossal clockwork of mythic time. Across cultures, storytellers looked upward and saw their foundational dramas playing out in the silent dance of the stars and planets. They did not separate astronomy from mythology, instead weaving them together into a single, grand cosmology where celestial movements directly reflected the rhythms of creation itself. The ancient Maya, for instance, were master timekeepers. Their long-count calendar was a breathtakingly precise astronomical instrument, tracking vast cycles they believed governed the very pulse of existence. They meticulously observed the wanderings of Venus, the phases of the moon, and the solar year, calculating cycles that stretched for millions of days. For them, time was not a neutral stream. Each cycle carried a specific spiritual quality, and the completion of a major era, like the famous one that ended in 2012, was a moment of profound cosmic transformation, a potential reset point written in the stars. This was not abstract science. It was a sacred duty, a way to align human society with the intentions of the gods and the original blueprint of the universe. Far across the Atlantic, the Dogon people of Mali hold a knowledge of the heavens that has puzzled modern astronomers. Their oral traditions, passed down through generations, speak with startling accuracy about the Sirius star system. They knew of Sirius B, a tiny, dense white dwarf star that is invisible to the naked eye, describing it as the heaviest star and saying it orbits its brighter companion in a 50-year elliptical cycle. How did a culture without telescopes come to possess such detailed knowledge? Their myths explain it as a revelation from amphibious beings, the Nommo, who came from the Sirius system in an ark. Whether this points to an astonishingly ancient and lost astronomical tradition or another source, it underscores a profound truth. The Dogon integrated this celestial data seamlessly into their cosmology, making the distant Sirius system a central character in their story of origin. This pattern repeats globally. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars became the hands on a cosmic clock, measuring out the great ages of the world that began in that misty prehistory. A constellation was not merely a pattern of lights. It was a god, a hero, or a great beast frozen in the sky as a permanent record of mythic events. The sky served as a divine map, a constant, visible reminder that the stories of the beginning were not over. They were still unfolding in an endless celestial performance, a cycle of return that humanity could watch, track, and ultimately participate in. Massive stones still whisper the stories they were built to tell. Scattered across the globe, megalithic monuments like Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain, Newgrange in Ireland, and the staggering Göbekli Tepe in Turkey are far more than ancient ruins. They are physical narratives carved from the earth itself, colossal attempts to capture the memory of a time before time. Their alignments are not random. The central passage of Newgrange is engineered so precisely that the dawn light of the winter solstice floods the inner chamber, illuminating a space meant for the dead or for gods. This was not simple stargazing. It was a profound act of synchronization, tying human ritual to the cosmic cycles that govern their myths of creation and rebirth. By marking the solstice, our ancestors were not just tracking the sun. They were reenacting the primordial moment when light first conquered darkness, pulling that sacred event out of the mythic past and into the tangible, predictable present. The stones served as a permanent stage for these foundational dramas. Imagine a community gathering at Stonehenge as the sun rose over the heel stone on the summer solstice. In that brilliant alignment, the story of the world's beginning was not just recited, it was felt. The warmth on their faces, the light flooding the circle, it was a direct encounter with the power that shaped the cosmos. The monument became a conduit, a machine for making myth real. This required more than just shamanic vision. It demanded immense, coordinated effort. The transport and erection of the giant sarsen stones for Stonehenge, some weighing over 25 tons, was a societal project spanning generations. Why would a community invest such staggering labor? Because remembering the deep past and maintaining a relationship with it was not a pastime, it was a matter of survival. A society that understood its origins, that knew the stories of the gods and the cycles of the world, was a society that knew its place in the universe. These structures were the bedrock of that understanding, the ultimate expression of a communal need to root themselves in the mythic soil from which they grew. The stones themselves were likely seen as eternal witnesses. Unlike wood or flesh, they did not rot or falter. They stood as permanent anchors, bridging the immense gap between the primordial events they commemorated and the fleeting lives of the people who gathered around them. Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple complex built over 11,000 years ago, makes this even more profound. Its T-shaped pillars, carved with elaborate animals, were deliberately buried, preserved for a future its builders would never see. This was not an act of abandonment, but one of sacred interment. They were entrusting their stories to the earth itself, ensuring the stones would carry their messages into eternity. These architectural marvels demonstrate a tangible, desperate connection to ancient imaginings of time. They are the physical dimension of the oral tradition, a permanent script written in circles and alignments for generations yet unborn. A king runs across a ritual courtyard, his feet pound the earth, not in flight, but in a sacred reenactment of a run that happened at the dawn of time. This was the Heb-Sed festival in ancient Egypt, a ceremony where the pharaoh did not merely commemorate the past. He physically returned to it, symbolically becoming the god Horus and re-performing the primordial acts that established cosmic order. His successful run was not a simple test of endurance. It was a magical act that rejuvenated his own power, and by extension the entire kingdom, pulling the vitality of the mythic age into the present moment to prevent the world from sliding back into chaos. This was the ultimate purpose of ritual, to collapse the distance between the legendary past and the urgent now. Across the Mediterranean, in the darkness of a hall at Eleusis, thousands of initiates experienced something similarly transformative. The Eleusinian mysteries were not a spectacle to be watched, but a profound emotional journey to be lived. Participants reenacted the anguish of the goddess Demeter as she searched for her abducted daughter, Persephone, and the overwhelming joy of their eventual reunion. Through fasting, sacred drinks, and powerful dramatic performances, they did not just hear about the cycle of death and rebirth, they felt it in their bones. They emerged from the ceremony fundamentally changed, carrying the certainty that life persisted beyond the grave, a truth granted not by scripture but by direct, visceral experience. These practices reveal a world where history was not a subject to be studied, but a force to be channeled. By embodying the gods and ancestors, people affirmed their identity within a story that had no end. A farmer playing a role in a harvest festival was not just ensuring a good crop. He was standing in for the very first farmer, linking his own labor to the original act of cultivation that made human society possible. This collective participation wove every individual into the continuous cosmic narrative, strengthening social bonds and making abstract cultural values as tangible as the ground beneath their feet. This immersive, emotional connection to the deep past stands in stark contrast to the revolution that was quietly unfolding. The development of writing would eventually transform memory from a living, breathed experience into something that could be stored, standardized, and scrutinized, shifting the very axis of how humanity understood its own story. The first scratch of a stylus on damp clay did more than record a transaction. It began to redraw the very boundaries of time. With the revolutionary invention of writing, the fluid, dreamlike realm of mythic prehistory began to harden into the linear, documented corridor of history. This was not an instant transformation, but a slow and fascinating merging of worlds. One of the most telling documents of this shift is the Sumerian king list, a chronicle that reads like a bridge between two realities. It meticulously names kings and the lengths of their reigns, but it begins with a time when kingship descended from heaven and rulers held power for tens of thousands of years. Divine beings and mortal dynasties sit side by side in the same list, the impossible reigns of gods gradually giving way to the plausible lifespans of men. This was not seen as a contradiction, but as a continuous narrative, a single line of authority stretching from the creation of the world to the current ruler on the throne. Writing gave societies a powerful new tool for memory, allowing them to fix events in a specific sequence and preserve the names of leaders and the outcomes of battles with a new kind of precision. The past was no longer solely held in the breath of a storyteller, vulnerable to change and interpretation. It was now anchored in a physical object, a tablet that could be stored, copied, and referenced. This very act of documentation began to demystify the world. A flood was no longer just a symbol of divine wrath. It could be recorded as a specific disaster in a certain year of a particular king's reign. Yet the old myths refused to vanish. They clung to the edges of these new records, providing the essential foundation, the divine justification for everything that followed. A king's right to rule was not just a matter of political succession. It was a legacy handed down from the gods themselves, a story now written in stone to make his power seem as eternal as the cosmos. This duality reveals the ancient storyteller's remarkable ability to adapt. The oral poet chanting of Gilgamesh found his tales transcribed onto clay. The scribe became a new kind of custodian, using the new technology of writing not to kill the myth, but to cement its authority, weaving the threads of divine origin into the very fabric of historical record. This tension between the timeless truth of myth and the dated fact of history tells us something profound about a changing human consciousness. We were beginning to see ourselves not just as characters in a grand, repeating cosmic story, but as actors on a unique, linear stage where our individual deeds could be remembered forever. This new sense of self, documented and placed in time, would fundamentally reshape how civilizations understood their own destiny. These universal patterns in creation stories form a kind of psychological bedrock for our species. A great flood, a cosmic battle between order and chaos, a primordial couple from whom all life descends. These are not just random inventions. They emerge again and again, from the isolated islands of the Pacific to the dense river valleys of Mesopotamia, because they speak to the most fundamental human experiences. The flood myth is perhaps the most widespread of all. We find it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the biblical story of Noah, and in the indigenous legends of the Americas, like the Haida tale of a rising ocean that forced people to flee into the mountains in canoes. While some researchers point to the possibility of a shared memory from the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose dramatically, the story's true power is symbolic. A flood represents a total cleansing, a divine reset that washes away a failed or corrupt world and allows for a new, more hopeful beginning. It is a narrative response to the universal human fear of catastrophe and the equally powerful hope for redemption and a second chance. Similarly, the motif of the primordial couple, like the Chinese Fuxi and Nuwa or the Adam and Eve of the Abrahamic faiths, tackles the profound mystery of human origin and our innate sense of duality, of male and female as complementary forces. These recurring themes point to a collective human psyche wrestling with the same big questions. Where did we come from? Why is there suffering? What is our place in the cosmos? The answers were shaped by local environments, of course. A culture in a desert might envision the primordial state as a vast, dry emptiness, while a seafaring people would naturally start their story with an endless ocean. Yet the core dilemmas remained strikingly similar. This adaptability is the true genius of myth. A single, powerful archetype, like the world parent whose body becomes the universe, could be tailored to explain the specific landscape of a people. The Norse saw the world in the brutal, ice-carved body of the giant Ymir. The ancient Chinese saw it in the patient, self-sacrificing form of Pangu. The same fundamental idea, that life springs from a sacred death, was molded to reflect two entirely different worldviews and environments. This flexibility allowed these ancient stories to remain relevant, their core truth resonating with each new generation, ensuring their survival long after the civilizations that first told them had turned to dust. The landscape itself was the first storyteller. A people surrounded by the relentless power of the ocean would naturally envision a world born from a churning, primordial sea. For the Norse, living with the frigid North Atlantic at their doorstep, creation was a violent reaction between elemental opposites, ice and fire, giving rise to a universe built from a frost giant's corpse. Their entire cosmology mirrored their environment, a world where order was a hard-won victory against a cold and chaotic wilderness. In stark contrast, the civilization of ancient Egypt was cradled by the predictable, life-giving Nile, flowing through an otherwise unforgiving desert. Their creation myth began not with a struggle but with an emergence. The first land, a mound of fertile silt, simply rose from the endless, dark waters of none, just as the Nile's receding floodwaters revealed new, rich soil each year. Their sun god, Ra, was not a distant figure but a daily protagonist who sailed his bark across the sky, ensuring the cycle of life continued. The environment did not just inspire the story, it was the story. In the towering Andes, where the peaks literally touch the clouds, the Incas saw these mountains not as mere rock, but as sacred beings, apus. Their myths told of powerful mountain spirits who controlled the weather and provided water to the valleys below. The landscape was alive, a direct conduit to the divine, and their creation narratives were rooted in the specific, awe-inspiring topography that surrounded them. A particular lake might be the tears of a moon goddess, a strange rock formation, the petrified body of a trickster. This deep connection served a profound purpose. By weaving the local geography into their myths, storytellers transformed the unknown into the familiar. That terrifying volcano was not just a mountain that spewed fire, it was the forge of a god. That unpredictable river was the winding path of a great serpent. This process made a vast and often intimidating world comprehensible and spiritually significant. It was, in essence, humanity's first attempt at environmental science. The myths encoded vital survival information, explaining seasonal changes, weather patterns, and the origins of local resources within a memorable, sacred framework. To know the story of the river god was to understand the importance of respecting the river itself. This intimate bond between place and narrative reveals the incredible adaptability of the human imagination, shaping the deepest questions about time and origin to fit the very ground beneath our ancestors' feet. Our minds are pattern-seeking engines, constantly trying to connect the dots in a chaotic world. This deep-seated cognitive drive is the very engine of myth-making. When our ancestors looked at the star-filled sky or felt the tremors of an earthquake, their brains, just like ours, demanded an explanation. An unexplained event is a source of primal anxiety. By crafting a story where the thunder is the voice of an angry god or the sunrise is a daily victory over darkness, they transformed a frightening unknown into a narrative with a cause and sometimes a remedy. These stories provided immense psychological comfort, imposing a sense of order and intention onto a universe that could otherwise feel random and hostile. But the purpose of these narratives extended far beyond individual peace of mind. They were the social glue of early societies. A shared creation story gave everyone a common foundation, a set of core beliefs about how the world worked and what their role in it should be. This collective identity was a powerful survival tool. A community that worshipped the same Earth Mother or traced its lineage back to the same hero twin was a community more likely to cooperate, to defend one another, and to uphold the same values. These myths were, in a very real sense, the childhood stories of entire civilizations. Just as a young child asks where they came from to understand their place in the family, early cultures asked where the world came from to understand their place in the cosmos. The answers they crafted, filled with gods and giants and primordial floods, were the necessary stepping stones to a stable, collective identity. This is why you find these narratives everywhere, from the most isolated tribes to the grandest empires. The drive to explain our origins is not a sign of primitive thinking, but a fundamental feature of the human mind. It is our species' way of building a home in the universe, a mental shelter made of story. When we recognize this, we stop seeing myths as mere fictions and start to appreciate them for what they truly are, profound tools for meaning-making that address our deepest psychological and social needs. This quest for meaning through story inevitably leads us to ponder the very nature of existence itself. These profound questions about time and existence were not left solely to storytellers. They became the central concern of philosophers who sought to distill the wisdom of the myths into systems of thought. The great Greek thinker Plato proposed a breathtaking idea that time itself was not eternal. He envisioned it as a moving image of eternity, a created shadow of a perfect, timeless realm of ideal forms. In this view, the events of prehistory, those first moments of creation, represented a time when the world was closer to those perfect blueprints, a golden age before the slow drift into the flawed reality we inhabit now. This was not just a poetic notion, it had immense consequences for how one should live. If our world is an imperfect copy of a perfect original, then the goal of human life, and indeed of just governance, is to align ourselves as closely as possible with those eternal ideals of truth, justice, and beauty. The myth of a lost golden age was no longer just a story, it was a philosophical mandate to strive for a higher reality. A similar but distinct vision emerged in the East with Taoism. Here, the cosmos was not a copy of a perfect form, but a spontaneous, effortless emergence from an unknowable source called the Tao. The Tao Te Ching opens by stating that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. This ineffable source gave rise to the duality of yin and yang, and from their interaction, the 10,000 things, the entire manifest world, flowed forth. This was a timeless, cyclical reality where the highest human virtue was not to strive and conquer, but to practice wu-wei, or effortless action, aligning one's life with the natural, spontaneous flow of the cosmos itself. How you governed a kingdom, how you planted a field, how you composed your own mind, all of it was to be in harmony with this primordial principle. The beginning was not a single event in the past, but a continuous, ever-present process of emergence. These philosophical systems, born from contemplating the great beginnings, provided a complete framework for existence. They answered the why as much as the how. They told people not only where they came from, but how to live, how to rule, and how to find their place within an orderly, if mysterious, universe. This transformation from tale to treatise shows the evolving human mind wrestling with the biggest possible concepts, using the foundation of myth to build entire architectures of meaning. And this profound philosophical depth would soon find another, equally powerful language, one that spoke not to the mind, but directly to the senses. A scarab beetle pushes the sun across the sky in a vivid Egyptian tomb painting, giving tangible form to the daily rebirth of the world. This was the power of ancient art to visualize the unseeable past. Long before the written word could be widely read, artists were the silent storytellers, translating abstract cosmic concepts into powerful visual narratives. On the walls of tombs and temples, they painted the god Autumn rising from the dark, chaotic waters of Nun, his emergence a silent drama of creation anyone could understand. In Mesopotamia, a scribe would roll a carved cylinder seal across a soft clay tablet, leaving behind an impression of the god Marduk locked in eternal combat with the serpentine Tiamat. These images were not mere illustrations. They were mnemonic devices, memory aids that reinforced the oral traditions and made the foundational stories accessible to everyone, regardless of literacy. A farmer offering a gift at a temple could look upon that carved scene and recall the entire epic of how order was wrestled from chaos. But art could express what words sometimes could not capture. The sheer scale of a stone statue of a god towering over a worshipper communicated a sense of divine power and awe that a story told around a fire might struggle to convey. The emotional weight of a mother goddess cradling the first human, carved from soft soapstone, spoke of a nurturing relationship between the divine and humanity. Every stylistic choice was laden with meaning. The Egyptians used specific, unchanging colors, like the vibrant green for life and rebirth or the deep black of the fertile Nile silt, to encode cultural values directly into their art. The rigid, hierarchical proportions of their figures, with gods larger than pharaohs and pharaohs larger than commoners, visually reinforced the cosmic and social order established at the beginning of time. This visual language created a rich, multi-layered mythological landscape, a tangible connection to the imagined past that surrounded people in their daily lives. It was a tradition of giving the formless a face and the timeless a shape, a practice that continues today in every film, painting, and digital animation that seeks to bring our oldest stories to life. The ancient gods have found a new pantheon, and it is built from pixels and pages. These primordial stories of creation and chaos did not fade away with the rise of science. Instead, they migrated, finding a vibrant afterlife in our contemporary culture. A novel like Neil Gaiman's American Gods does not merely reference Odin or Anansi. It asks what happens to these divine beings when the civilizations that worship them turn their faith to new idols, like technology and media. It is a story about the very power of belief, the same force that first gave life to these deities in the ancient storytellers' imagination. In the God of War video game series, the brutal, world-forging violence of the Norse creation myth is not a distant tale. It is the gameplay itself. You, as the protagonist Kratos, do not just hear about Ymir's corpse becoming the world. You traverse it, you fight upon it, you experience the tangible consequences of that primordial death in a way that a written epic could never fully convey. These are not simple retellings, they are conversations with the past using the language of the present. They take the core themes of ancient imaginings, the struggle between order and chaos, the transformative power of sacrifice, and the eternal search for meaning, and they reframe them for an audience grappling with its own modern anxieties. What is our place in a digitally saturated world? What new gods have we created, and what old ones have we forgotten? By dressing ancient archetypes in contemporary clothing, these works perform the same function as the oral storytellers of old. They make the profound questions of existence accessible, immediate, and deeply personal. They are a bridge carrying the wisdom of the deep passed directly into the hands and minds of a new generation, ensuring that the dialogue about who we are and where we came from never truly ends. This enduring power of myth, its stubborn refusal to be relegated to history books, suggests it speaks to something fundamental in the human condition. And this raises a compelling question. How do these ancient imaginings hold up when placed alongside the cold, hard facts of modern science? The universe began not with a word, but with a silent, radiant flash. Modern cosmology tells us of the Big Bang, a singular point of infinite density that expanded into the cosmos we inhabit today. It is a story of physics, of mathematical equations and observational data. And yet, it shares a strange, poetic resonance with the oldest stories we possess. The primordial state of chaos, the formless void described by so many cultures, bears a haunting similarity to the concept of a singularity. The moment of creation, whether initiated by a god's thought or a giant's axe, mirrors that initial, unimaginable expansion. Both narratives, one scientific and one mythic, grapple with the same impossible concept, the transition from absolute nothingness to a universe of something. This is not a coincidence. It is a testament to the human mind's ability to intuit a profound truth long before it could be proven in a laboratory. Ancient storytellers observed the world and deduced that everything must have come from a single, concentrated source. They just clothed that deduction in the language of gods and monsters. Similarly, the recurring theme of life emerging from water, central to myths from the Egyptian nun to the Aboriginal Dreamtime, finds a powerful echo in evolutionary biology. Science confirms that all life on Earth originated in the ancient oceans. a slow, patient journey from single-celled organisms to the complexity we see today. The myths, in their own symbolic way, were pointing to the same fundamental reality, that water is the cradle of existence. This fascinating alignment, however, is not a validation of myth as literal truth. The crucial differences are just as illuminating. Evolutionary biology describes a process driven by random mutation and natural selection over billions of years, devoid of any inherent purpose or divine plan. In contrast, creation myths are almost universally teleological. They are stories with a goal, a conscious intent. The Mayan gods tried and failed until they created humans who could worship them. The Norse gods slew Ymir to build a world with a specific order. Science explains the mechanism, while myth explains the meaning. One tells us how we came to be, the other attempts to answer why. This divergence does not diminish the value of either narrative. Instead, it highlights the different tools each uses to explore the same mystery. Our ancestors used the tools of story, metaphor, and personification to make the cosmos comprehensible on a human scale. We now use the tools of empirical observation and falsifiable hypothesis. Both are expressions of a relentless human drive to understand our place in the grand scheme of things. This dialogue between ancient intuition and modern discovery enriches our perspective, allowing us to appreciate the poetry of our origins without sacrificing the rigor of scientific fact. It reminds us that the quest to explain our beginnings is a fundamental part of our humanity, a story we are still collectively writing, and that every effort to preserve these ancient tales is an act of safeguarding a crucial chapter in the long story of human curiosity. A living library is quietly vanishing with every elder who passes without a student. Indigenous oral traditions hold perspectives on prehistory that dominant historical narratives have consistently overlooked, and with them, we risk losing entire worldviews. Organizations like the Living Tongues Institute are racing against time, documenting endangered languages and the stories they carry, recognizing that this is a rescue mission for human intellectual heritage. These are not simple tales. Woven into the narrative of how the Mantis God Kagan shaped the land is a detailed map of local flora and fauna, a guide to seasonal changes, and a philosophy of deep respect for the natural world. The stories function as a sophisticated data storage system, encoding generations of observational science within a memorable, sacred framework. They answer not only how the world was made, but how to live sustainably within it. This ecological wisdom is precisely what modern societies, grappling with climate change and resource depletion, are desperately seeking. We look for high-tech solutions, while these ancient stories offer a time-tested ethic of balance and reciprocity, reminding us that humanity is part of an interconnected web, not its master. Preserving these accounts is an act of honoring the profound creativity of ancient storytellers, ensuring their intellectual labor is not erased. It affirms that a single, monolithic version of history is insufficient. The true richness of our shared past emerges only when a plurality of voices, from the Dreamtime to the Popol Vuh, is allowed to contribute to the chorus. This is more than cultural archaeology. It is a vital expansion of human understanding. By recognizing the validity of these different ways of knowing, we open a global dialogue that is deeper, wiser, and far more complete. A conversation we will return to as we reflect on what all these ancient beginnings ultimately mean for us today. These ancient stories are more than just relics. They are a mirror held up to our own time, reflecting timeless truths about the human condition. At their core, they teach a profound lesson in humility. Our ancestors looked into the starry abyss and acknowledged a fundamental mystery, that they were part of a cosmos far grander than themselves. They did not claim to have all the answers. Instead, they crafted narratives that honored the unknown, placing humanity within a vast, interconnected tapestry of life, land, and spirit. In our modern age of scientific mastery and instant information, it is easy to lose that sense of awe. We can explain the mechanics of a supernova, but have we forgotten how to feel its sublime wonder? These myths invite us to reclaim a healthy humility, to recognize that our current moment is but a single thread in an epic that stretches back to the very first storyteller's fire. This perspective naturally fosters a long-term view. The cyclical time of the Hindus or the eternal dreamtime challenges our obsession with the immediate and the new. It suggests that our deepest challenges and triumphs are part of a grand, repeating pattern. What decisions would we make today if we saw ourselves as ancestors to generations 1,000 years from now? This long lens can reframe our priorities, encouraging stewardship over short-term gain. Furthermore, these stories were never born in isolation. They are the ultimate products of community. A myth was shaped and polished by countless voices around countless fires, each telling adding a layer of meaning and relevance. The story itself was a social contract, reinforcing the values that bound people together, whether it was the importance of sacrifice in the Norse world or the sacred duty of praise in the Mayan. In an era of digital fragmentation and curated online identities, these ancient narratives remind us that our most enduring sense of purpose and belonging is forged together. They demonstrate that meaning is not something we find alone, but something we create and sustain collectively. Perhaps the most urgent lesson is one of balance. The world born from Pangu established the harmony of yin and yang. The Aboriginal Dreamtime wove people into the land so tightly that to harm one was to harm the other. These are not primitive fantasies. They are sophisticated models for sustainable existence encoded in story. They teach that humanity is not the master of nature, but a participant in its delicate, living systems. In an age of ecological crisis, this ancient wisdom speaks directly to our need for reconciliation with the planet. Ultimately, these tales highlight the enduring power of narrative itself. Just as the Mesopotamian epic justified a king's rule and the sand story explained the sacredness of an antelope, the stories we tell today shape our identity and guide our behavior. They determine what we value, what we fear, and what we believe is possible. By engaging with these first imaginings, we do more than study the past. We tap into the creative spirit that has always driven us to explore the unknown and to leave a story worth telling for those who will come after us. Our journey through these first stories ends with a powerful realization. The human impulse to explain our origins is itself a kind of universal myth, a defining feature of our species. From the Aboriginal everyone to the Maya's sacred maze, these narratives were never simple fantasies. They were profound acts of world-building, providing meaning, moral order, and a deep sense of belonging to people navigating a vast and often intimidating cosmos. They offered a framework for understanding everything from the changing seasons to the nature of death itself. This shared quest for understanding connects cultures separated by oceans and millennia, revealing a common thread of creativity and curiosity that runs through all of human history. In our modern world, with its scientific precision and digital archives, we can sometimes lose touch with this foundational sense of wonder. Yet the challenges we face today, from forging community in a fragmented world to mending our relationship with a fragile planet, call for the very wisdom these ancient stories hold. They encourage us to embrace imagination, to respect a plurality of perspectives, and to remember that we are part of a story much larger than our own brief chapter. The tales we tell about our past ultimately shape the future we are willing to build. I would love to hear which of these ancient imaginings resonated most with you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, And if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more explorations into the profound mysteries of our shared human past. Thank you for listening.